There was once a family in northern Italy whose life had become unbearable. Teresa, a devoted grandmother, wrote to me with trembling hands about the strange occurrences in her home. Her grandson wouldn't enter certain rooms. Her daughter and son-in-law, once deeply in love, now argued constantly over the smallest matters. Even their elderly dog refused to sleep in its usual spot by the fireplace. "We've tried everything," Teresa explained. "Marriage counseling, child therapy, even a veterinarian for our dog's sudden behavior change. No one can explain what's happening to our once peaceful home." What Teresa didn't realize, what most faithful Catholics don't know, is that an innocent-looking object hanging on her living room wall might be the source of her family's unexplained suffering. When I asked about religious items recently brought into her home, she mentioned an antique rosary she'd purchased at a local estate sale. Jet black with unusual silver symbols embedded in some of the beads. Within 2 weeks of removing this rosary from her home, Teresa's family life transformed completely. Her grandson's mysterious fears vanished. The constant arguments subsided. Even their dog returned to its beloved spot by the hearth. This isn't merely coincidence. This comes directly from the extraordinary spiritual insights of Padre Pio, a saint who could perceive what remains invisible to most of us. What I'm about to share with you today is perhaps one of Padre Pio's least known but most crucial teachings for our modern world. A warning about certain types of rosaries that might be bringing spiritual disruption into Catholic homes rather than divine protection. In our conversations with thousands of devoted followers over the years, we've documented hundreds of cases similar to Teresa's, where removing specific kinds of rosaries led to profound spiritual healing in homes and families. Padre Pio, blessed with remarkable spiritual gifts, including stigmata, bilocation, and profound spiritual discernment, could instantly recognize when an object carried troubling spiritual influences. Many pilgrims to San Giovanni Rotondo were startled when he refused to bless certain items they brought, sometimes even gently suggesting these objects be properly disposed of through specific spiritual protocols. The Rosary itself is one of our faith's most powerful spiritual tools, a direct connection to Our Lady, and through her to Christ himself. Since its revelation to Saint Dominic, it has been associated with countless miracles, conversions, and spiritual victories. This very power, however, makes it a particular target for spiritual distortion. Today, I'm going to reveal the 3 specific types of rosaries that Padre Pio consistently warned against keeping in Catholic homes. I'll explain exactly how these seemingly innocent prayer beads might be affecting your family's spiritual well-being, and share 7 unmistakable signs that a rosary in your home might be spiritually compromised. I'll also provide Padre Pio's specific guidance for restoring spiritual protection to your living space. The wisdom I'm about to share isn't widely taught. Even many devout Catholics remain unaware of these spiritual dangers hiding in plain sight. Most importantly, I'll explain exactly what Padre Pio recommended for protecting your home and loved ones from these subtle spiritual influences. Let's begin by understanding why the Rosary holds such tremendous spiritual significance. This simple string of beads represents far more than a physical prayer aid. When properly blessed and used with sincere devotion, the Rosary creates what Padre Pio described as a spiritual shield around the person praying, and by extension, their home. Throughout his ministry, Padre Pio frequently referred to the Rosary as the weapon for these times, a phrase that reveals his profound understanding of the spiritual battles that surround us, often unseen, but deeply consequential. The Rosary, when used as intended, channels divine grace and protection into our everyday lives, creating a sacred space amid worldly chaos. This spiritual power explains why certain forces might seek to distort or diminish the Rosary's effectiveness. As Padre Pio often explained to his spiritual children, the enemy knows the power of the Rosary better than many faithful Catholics do. This is why he works so diligently to disrupt this devotion through any means possible. One of these means, Padre Pio discerned, was through the subtle alteration or misuse of the physical Rosary itself. Through his extraordinary gift of spiritual sight, Padre Pio could distinguish between rosaries that served their sacred purpose and those that carried spiritual disturbances. Let me share a particularly striking example from Padre Pio's ministry. In 1957, a wealthy aristocrat from Rome visited San Giovanni Rotondo. bringing with her an exquisite rosary made of rare gems and precious metals. While others admired its beauty, Padre Pio refused to touch it. When asked why, he explained that this rosary, despite its material value, had been created with pride rather than devotion. The craftsman had worked with technical skill, but without prayer, and the owner valued it more for its artistic merit than its spiritual purpose. A simple wooden rosary made by a humble monk at prayer, Padre Pio explained, carries far more spiritual power than the most expensive rosary made without devotion. This insight leads us to understand the first category of potentially problematic rosaries, those made without proper spiritual intention. But Padre Pio's discernment went deeper, identifying 3 specific types that deserve particular caution. The first category involves completely black rosaries. While black can certainly represent mourning and penitence in our Catholic tradition, Padre Pio noted that this color has often been appropriated for practices contrary to our faith. He could sense when a black rosary had been involved in rituals or ceremonies that distorted its sacred purpose. One devoted follower of Padre Pio shared how her teenage daughter had developed inexplicable anxiety and resistance to prayer. These symptoms emerged shortly after receiving a gift of an antique black rosary from a well-meaning friend. The mother, initially dismissing any connection, finally consulted with a priest who had studied under Padre Pio. Following the saint's protocols, they had the rosary examined by a knowledgeable priest who discovered unusual modifications to the crucifix, subtle alterations that distorted its sacred symbolism. After proper disposal of this rosary and a home blessing, the daughter's symptoms resolved completely. As Padre Pio explained to many troubled families, black rosaries, particularly those from unknown sources or with unusual features, deserve careful spiritual discernment. The second category Padre Pio identified involves blood-red rosaries. While red naturally symbolizes the blood of Christ and the martyrs in our tradition, certain intensely red rosaries, particularly those made from unusual materials or with non-traditional designs, raised Padre Pio's spiritual concerns. A family from Naples experienced ongoing discord and financial troubles that began shortly after displaying a blood-red rosary prominently in their home. This rosary, purchased at an antique shop for its unusual beauty, featured beads of an unnatural crimson intensity. After learning about Padre Pio's warnings, they asked their parish priest to examine it. He noticed subtle irregularities in the spacing of the beads and unusual symbols integrated into the crucifix design, elements that deviated from traditional Catholic imagery. Following Padre Pio's guidance, they had the rosary properly disposed of through appropriate prayers and protocols. Within months, their family harmony and financial stability gradually returned. As Padre Pio explained, certain red rosaries, particularly those with unusual intensity of color or non-traditional designs, might have been created for purposes other than Catholic devotion. The third category, perhaps the most concerning in our contemporary context, involves multicolored rosaries incorporating elements from non-Christian spiritual traditions. In our age of spiritual eclecticism, these hybrid prayer beads have become increasingly common, often marketed as universal prayer beads or inclusive spiritual tools. Padre Pio was particularly troubled by rosaries that combined Catholic elements with symbols, materials, or designs from incompatible spiritual practices. These might include unusual crystals claimed to have specific energetic properties, symbols from various world religions, or elements like evil eyes integrated into the design. A teacher from Milan shared how her classroom had experienced unusual tension and conflict among students. After reading about Padre Pio's teachings, she realized the colorful World Peace Rosary hanging by her desk, featuring beads representing different world religions, might be creating what Padre Pio called spiritual confusion. The rosary combined Catholic prayers with elements from multiple spiritual traditions. After replacing it with a traditional Catholic rosary, she noticed a remarkable improvement in classroom harmony. As Padre Pio explained, these syncretic rosaries, while often created with positive intentions, create confusion about the nature of prayer itself. Prayer in our tradition is directed toward God through specific channels of grace. When prayer tools incorporate elements from spiritual systems with fundamentally different understandings of the divine, they can create what Padre Pio described as spiritual static, interference in the clear channel of communication with God. Beyond these three specific categories, Padre Pio expressed concern about the modern trend of treating rosaries primarily as fashion accessories or decorative items. When sacred objects become primarily aesthetic pieces, divorced from their spiritual purpose, they risk losing their spiritual integrity. This doesn't necessarily make them spiritually dangerous in the same way as objects used in contrary practices, but it represents a different kind of spiritual confusion, one that trivializes sacred things. How might the presence of these problematic rosaries manifest in your home and family life? Padre Pio identified several common signs that a rosary might be creating spiritual disruption rather than protection. The first sign often appears in your prayer life. Many devoted Catholics report experiencing a mysterious resistance to prayer despite their sincere intention. One elderly gentleman from Sicily described it as feeling like pushing against an invisible weight whenever he attempted to pray in his home study, where he had displayed an unusual rosary collection. After removing certain rosaries following Padre Pio's guidelines, he found his prayer life flowing naturally again. A second sign involves unusual tensions in family relationships. Unexplained arguments, misunderstandings, and emotional distance, particularly when these develop suddenly in previously harmonious relationships, might indicate spiritual disruption. What makes this sign particularly difficult to recognize is how ordinary these tensions can appear, often mistaken for normal family stress rather than spiritual interference. Sleep disturbances represent a third common indication. Nightmares, insomnia, or feeling unusually exhausted upon waking, especially when these symptoms affect multiple family members simultaneously, might suggest spiritual influence. Padre Pio explained that during sleep, our conscious defenses are naturally lowered, making us more susceptible to subtle spiritual influences. Children and pets, with their natural spiritual sensitivity, often react first to these influences. A child's inexplicable reluctance to enter certain rooms, unusual fears, or behavioral changes might signal their intuitive response to spiritually compromised objects. Pets might avoid certain areas of the home or display unusual agitation without apparent cause. Financial difficulties and health problems without clear explanation sometimes accompany the presence of spiritually troubling objects. While these challenges have many potential causes, Padre Pio observed that spiritual disruption often manifests in practical areas of life, creating obstacles to well-being and prosperity. Emotional and psychological symptoms, unexplained depression, anxiety, or a persistent sense of heaviness in the home can also indicate spiritual interference. Many families report experiencing what one mother described as an emotional fog that lifted remarkably after removing certain rosaries from their home following Padre Pio's guidance. Perhaps most troubling is the gradual weakening of faith and devotion that sometimes occurs in homes with spiritually compromised objects. This might manifest as growing religious indifference, resistance to attending Mass, or a general spiritual lethargy that develops over time. What makes these signs particularly difficult to recognize is their gradual development. Spiritual disruption rarely announces itself dramatically. Instead, it often builds slowly, eroding peace and harmony incrementally until family life feels fundamentally altered. Let me share a powerful testimony from Maria, a grandmother from a small village near Rome. For nearly 3 years, her previously harmonious household experienced escalating conflict, emotional distance, and inexplicable health challenges. What began as occasional disagreements evolved into a pattern of constant tension. Their parish priest, familiar with Padre Pio's teachings, asked about religious items in their home. Maria remembered a collection of unusual rosaries displayed in a glass case, beautiful pieces in various colors and materials that she'd collected over many years from various sources. Following Padre Pio's protocols, they examined each rosary carefully, identifying several that matched the concerning descriptions. After proper disposal of these items and a thorough home blessing, the transformation in their household was remarkable. Within weeks, the atmosphere lightened, relationships began healing, and even their health issues showed improvement. What Padre Pio emphasized about these spiritually compromised objects is that they don't create problems from nothing. Rather, they magnify existing human weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Like a magnifying glass focusing sunlight, they can intensify natural human failings into persistent patterns of discord. This explains why their effects can be so difficult to identify. The resulting problems seem like natural extensions of ordinary human weakness, rather than external spiritual influence. If you've recognized some of these signs in your own home, don't be alarmed. Padre Pio provided clear, practical guidance for addressing these concerns with both faith and prudence. His approach balanced spiritual discernment with practical action, emphasizing that addressing these concerns required both prayer and appropriate action. The first step Padre Pio recommended was a thorough inventory of religious items in your home. This isn't about becoming fearful or suspicious, but rather bringing mindful awareness to objects we often take for granted. Examine each rosary, noting its origin, materials, and any unusual features that deviate from traditional designs. Ask yourself, where did this come from? Who made it? What was their intention? If you discover rosaries that match the three concerning categories, black, blood red, or unusual multicolored ones with non-traditional elements, Padre Pio offered specific protocols. Importantly, he cautioned against simply throwing them away, as this doesn't address their spiritual nature. For rosaries with unclear origins, but no obviously troubling features, Padre Pio recommended having them blessed by a priest. Most parish priests can perform this blessing after Mass or during scheduled office hours. This blessing reconsecrates the object for its proper sacred purpose, nullifying any previous misuse or negative associations. However, for rosaries that trigger genuine spiritual discomfort or possess clearly problematic elements, Padre Pio advised a different approach. These should be taken to a priest experienced in spiritual matters who can determine whether the item should be blessed or, in some cases, properly disposed of through specific prayers and protocols. The proper way to dispose of blessed items that cannot be repurposed, Padre Pio explained, is to return them to the elements. This typically means burning or burying them after appropriate prayers have been said. This should be done with reverence, acknowledging that even compromised religious objects deserve respectful treatment. Prevention is equally important. When acquiring new rosaries, Padre Pio emphasized three criteria: proper source, proper blessing, and proper intention. Purchase rosaries only from reputable religious suppliers, church gift shops, established Catholic bookstores, or directly from religious communities. Have them blessed before use, and approach them with reverence rather than as decorative or fashion accessories. Padre Pio particularly recommended traditional rosaries made of simple materials, wood, glass, or basic metals, crafted by religious communities as part of their contemplative work. These rosaries, he noted, carry the added blessing of being created in an environment of prayer. For those who've experienced negative spiritual influences, Padre Pio suggested a comprehensive approach to restoring spiritual health to the home. This included having the house blessed by a priest, establishing a dedicated prayer space with properly blessed religious items, and maintaining regular family prayer, particularly the rosary itself when used as intended. One practical recommendation that Padre Pio often gave was creating what he called a spiritual shield for the home. This involved placing properly blessed sacramentals, a crucifix, holy water, and a simple traditional rosary near entryways and in bedrooms. These items, when blessed and used with sincere devotion, create a protective spiritual atmosphere. Let me share another remarkable testimony that illustrates the effectiveness of these protocols. Joseph, a widower from a small coastal town, had experienced increasing isolation and spiritual dryness since his wife's passing. Despite his lifelong faith, he found himself unable to pray with his usual devotion and experienced a growing sense of emptiness in his home. A visiting niece, familiar with Padre Pio's teachings, noticed an unusual collection of rosaries displayed prominently in his living room, gifts from well-meaning friends and family over the years. Several matched the concerning descriptions: a jet black rosary with unusual metal beads, a blood red rosary with non-traditional spacing, and several multicolored ones incorporating unusual materials and symbols. Following Padre Pio's guidance, they carefully assessed each rosary. Those from trusted sources were kept and blessed by their parish priest. Others with concerning features were properly disposed of through appropriate spiritual protocols. They then had the home blessed and established a simple prayer corner with a traditional wooden rosary blessed by their priest. The transformation in Joseph's spiritual life was profound. His ability to pray returned, the oppressive atmosphere in his home lifted, and he found himself reconnecting with his faith community. As he later explained, "It was like removing a heavy blanket I hadn't even realized was covering my spirit." What's particularly beautiful about Padre Pio's teaching on this subject is that it emphasizes the positive power of properly blessed and used sacramentals rather than focusing on fear. He wanted the faithful to understand that true spiritual protection comes not from treating religious objects as magical talismans, but from approaching them with informed reverence and sincere devotion. In all these recommendations, Padre Pio emphasized an important principle. The power lies not in the objects themselves, but in the faith, intention, and divine blessing they carry. A simple wooden rosary, properly blessed and used with sincere devotion, carries far more spiritual power than the most ornate or expensive rosary approached as a talisman or accessory. As we conclude our exploration of this vital teaching from Padre Pio, let's remember his greatest message. True protection comes not from objects themselves, but from sincere faith expressed through proper devotion. The rosary, when used as intended, is indeed the weapon for these times. But like any weapon, it must be used with proper understanding and respect. The spiritual insights we've explored today reflect Padre Pio's profound concern for the spiritual well-being of everyday Catholic families. In our modern world, where religious objects are often mass-produced, marketed as fashion accessories, or created without proper spiritual understanding, his warnings deserve our careful attention. If you've recognized signs of spiritual disruption in your home, or have concerns about rosaries in your possession, I encourage you to take these insights to prayer. Speak with a knowledgeable priest familiar with these traditional teachings, and consider implementing the practical steps Padre Pio recommended for restoring spiritual protection to your living space. Remember his words of reassurance: pray, hope, and don't worry. Spiritual discernment isn't about fear, but about living wisely in awareness of both visible and invisible realities. By approaching our devotional objects with informed reverence, we honor the sacred purpose for which they were intended. If this teaching has resonated with your spirit, I invite you to write "Padre Pio, guide my discernment" in the comments below. Your comment will help others discover this important message who may be facing unexplained spiritual challenges in their homes. For those seeking deeper spiritual guidance, consider joining our God Protect Me membership plan on our Padre Pio Teachings channel. Members receive exclusive access to additional teachings, special prayers recommended by Padre Pio for home protection, and monthly blessing services live-streamed from chapels dedicated to Padre Pio's memory. Your support enables us to continue sharing these vital spiritual insights with faithful Catholics worldwide. Each subscription helps us reach more souls seeking spiritual guidance in these challenging times. If this message has touched your heart, please like this video, share it with loved ones who might benefit from this wisdom, and subscribe to our channel. Our mission to preserve and share Padre Pio's spiritual legacy depends entirely on the support of faithful viewers like you. Together, we form a spiritual family, united by our dedication to authentic Catholic teaching and practice. Before we conclude, I'd like to offer a simple prayer for spiritual protection, one that Padre Pio often recommended to families concerned about spiritual influences in their homes. Heavenly Father, through the intercession of Saint Padre Pio, we ask for your divine protection over our home and family. Cleanse our living space of any influences that do not come from you. Guide us in discerning what brings true spiritual blessing, and grant us wisdom in creating a home environment that fosters prayer, peace, and faithful devotion. Fill every corner of our dwelling with your holy presence, and surround us with your protective grace. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you for joining me today on this spiritual journey of discovery. Until we meet again in our next video, keep faith in your heart and wisdom in your spiritual practices. May God bless you and your loved ones abundantly.